Hey guys, we're here for another Stark Contrast. I'm Malik, and I'm here with my good friend Brianna and Nick.
Hello.
And this time we're talking about Marvel's Eternals, and also their Disney Plus series What If. I think we'll go ahead and kick it off with Eternals, and just hear what Nick and Brianna thought of it first before I give my thoughts.
Okay, so Brianna, you actually saw the first of the two of us. So, did you have any expectations for that movie going in? What did you think coming out?
Um, I have usually relatively few expectations for anything that I watch. There are I don't know. I don't I get excited to watch movies, but I don't really expect anything in particular out of them. So most movies that I watch, I kind of just go in seeing how much of a good time I'm gonna have while watching it. And I had a great time. I know some people do not like to, sit through all the dialogue and all the personal relationships that really populated this movie. Um, I don't mind that kind of thing at all. I love it, and I thought that the themes of the movie and what I could glean from I feel like what the movie was trying to say, the message it was trying to get across, was also really really nice and really heartwarming, and I liked it. I thought it was a fun watch, and I'd watch it again. But I'm also like a happy medium between you two. So that's probably as much as I'll have to say about it until we really get in depth.
Yeah, this is one of those movies where it's good that we talk spoilers because it's you kind of just have to jump into what happens to get into your thoughts on it. I freaking adore this movie. Like it could possibly be my new favorite MCU movie. I think I have to I think I have to watch it like another 10 or so times before I say that with confidence. But and like anyone who knows me knows that that's not something I say lightly because I've had the same favorite for like 7 years now. And so that this one is even in contention is like it's a big deal. And I went in with sort of measured expectations. I've seen it twice. The first time I went in with kind of oh, sorry, measured expectations because I think everyone knows at this point the kind of bizarre backlash that this movie's been getting. It's the first MCU movie to be rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. A lot of people who I follow and whose tastes that I tend to trust, even when I don't agree with them, were coming out of this one saying like it was awful. They couldn't engage with it emotionally at all. Like they just hated the plot. I've listened to and read and watched several negative reviews of this movie, both before and after seeing it, and I'm just like, I feel like half the planet just watched a completely different film to the one that I watched because I don't know, just I have almost nothing negative to say about this movie. I was compelled through every instant of it, and I'm not going to make the Batman v Superman comparison that I was going to make initially that kind of bewildered you guys when I mentioned it off camera. But I will say I had kind of an inverse experience where a lot of people reacted to Batman v Superman the way they reacted to this movie. And seeing that for the first time, I sort of sit down in the theater and I'm like cautiously with it and waiting for it to sort of get good or get bad. I spend like maybe the first 2 minutes of Eternals being like, all right, show me what you got, movie. And then very quickly, I'm just in it for the long haul, just completely enraptured. Like I'm enraptured with this movie, and I cannot wait to get into like the actual story of it.
Um, I wouldn't say I'm quite as enthusiastic as Nick. I do like this movie quite a bit actually. And I think Chris Duckman said it best. This feels like the Justice League movie that Zack Snyder thought he was making,
Yep.
and there's some really compelling twists and turns. We actually change things up and make a fairly fresh and kind of, I mean, very familiar, obviously, but like still very fresh and unique film that we have not gotten from the MCU before. And one of one of the best things about this movie to me is you get to the end and I can't even really say definitively or not whether or not I thought the heroes even made the right choice at the end of the movie.
Yeah,
Who knows?
and
Who's to say?
and like
It's a much grander argument of like, pro-choice, but not, or in like a more like grand universal sense, I guess, because you're dealing with planets and like thousands and thousands of lives.
yeah, this reminds me of a Doctor Who episode that ostensibly, and the writer allegedly didn't plan for it to, but it ostensibly tackles like planetary lives and deaths as kind of an abstract abortion metaphor. And let's just say that this movie handles it better than that episode did. But yeah, I agree totally that it feels like something unique for this franchise. And part of what I love about it is that it's the first one of these in a long time that's sort of given me that like quote unquote magic feeling of like I can't believe that this shares like a world and a setting with the other movies, because it's been a while since one of these has given me that. And I feel like coming out of this movie, and I've always been someone, like Malik knows this and Brianna a little bit too, like I've always been someone who kind of pushes back a little bit to the criticism of the Marvel movies that they're like so formulaic and they're all just the same movie over and over again. And I maintain that, but coming out of this one, I felt like I was seeing the Matrix, like the code for the first time, or like now even the other MCU movies that are comparatively unique still feel like, and I love those movies still, but every one of the what like 25 movies preceding this one feels like they're playing in the same sandbox, and this movie isn't doing that. And just that fact alone gets me like one so excited for potentially more done with these characters and this plot line, but mainly just more excited for where we're going with the rest of Phase 4. Because Phase 4, I think every project has been unique to different degrees, and we're going to talk about What If later, which is a very unique project. But Eternals and What If and a lot of these things, I'm like, man, it really feels like they're comfortable after phase 3 and they're really starting to swing for the fences and do new fresh feeling stuff, and I'm so jazzed about that. So I don't know, you want to get straight into spoilers or what?
Well, sure. Because one of my favorite things about this movie is Icarus.
Yes. Oh gosh, I said this on Twitter and I stand by it. My favorite character the first time was Druig. I could watch this movie 10 times and have a different favorite character each time. And on my second viewing, Icarus really, really stood out for me, and I loved him a lot.
And much like, or at least I hope they stick on this path with Wanda, but it was so cool to see the hero or a hero take a villainous dark turn and not try to like make an excuse for it or retcon it or give him this redemptive moment at the end. I mean, sure he goes back on it because he actually does feel something for
Cersei.
I'm blanking on Cersei. Yeah, he feels something for Cersei, so he just can't go through with hurting her. The weird thing that doesn't really play for me is the suicide kamikaze flying into the sun thing. I'm like, that's kind of weird. Like, I get like the Omni-Man like hesitation, like I can't go through with killing a loved one, just fly away, but straight into the sun.
Oh no, see, I love that. And like there are a lot of people who find that too silly because like I get it, he flew too close to the sun like Icarus, and we referenced it earlier in the movie. I don't know. I feel like that's great because obviously that's the quickest, easiest, simplest way to kill himself. And it makes total sense to me that he he can't he can't just like go off and live with having betrayed like his life's purpose. And this gets into sort of one of the themes that I was not expecting this movie to tackle at all, which is like, are the question the movie asks is kind of like, are these characters, the Eternals, actually alive? Like, are they actually living beings, and to what degree do they experience the human condition? And the answer obviously is yes, they are, and yes, they do. But you've got someone like Icarus who, in a sort of literal but mostly non-literal sense, is like hardwired with this mission. And like he says, it's the only path he knows. It is his life's purpose, and he backs out on it at the last second, and he can't square that paradox. Like, he's like, I do care for Cersei, and that makes him a living being who experiences like human emotion, but at the same time his life has been so dictated by the mission, the mission, the mission. And in that moment, I don't think he can live with himself, and so he kills himself. He can't sustain those two ways of being in his head.
That definitely tracks and matches up. It just plays as really awkward for me.
They had a dude flying
Uh,
the sun. I don't want to hear any of that shit. Like, period. When you put it on paper, when you say it like it is, flat out, they had a dude commit a crime. He couldn't live with it, and then he flew into the fucking sun. I'm over it. That was stupid. I like him. That was stupid.
And like the other weird thing, and we do this so much in Marvel movies, I don't buy that he's even dead. I don't. I could see them just as easily bringing him back and saying that I didn't kill him in the next movie. So that's another reason why I find it kind of strange.
No, I wouldn't see, because we don't do flat out resurrections that often. Like, we'll bring back another version of a character.
Or we do death fake outs like all the time.
True, but that's usually like within a movie. Like, oh, it looks like a character died, and then before the movie's over, no, it turns out they're alive. And plus, I think if he or Gilgamesh or Ajak, who are the other two Eternals that die in this movie, if any of them come back, I don't think it'll be in the the death scene or the thing that we did before just didn't take sort of way, because we've got a built-in kind of mechanism to bring them back if we wanted to, which
I super detest that, because another one of the strong aspects of this movie to me is like, and what made it feel so different is you can just have characters die. Like it feels like damn near over half of our team dies.
3 out of 10. We lose 3 out of 10.
Oh, that's not even a ton. But even then, that felt like a lot, given how they handled it and how much it impacted everybody else.
Yeah. And like, just the chemistry between these characters is so great. And like, it's I get it that this didn't work for everybody, but I'm just freaking impressed with how well how well realized all these relationships feel, both for these characters and as individuals. And like, I feel like I could get a sense of how any 2 of them or 3 of them would interact. And there's 10 of them in this movie. That's kind of a hard thing to juggle. And a complaint I've heard from people is like, no character in this movie gets as much screen time as you'd want them to. Everybody feels like they're underserved because the movie's trying to juggle too much. I don't agree with that at all. I feel like everyone here gets exactly as much screen time and characterization as they needed.
I feel like we could have given some more stuff to the speedster chick. If I had to put out like one solid complaint, I don't feel like we do quite enough with the speedster sign language lady.
Makari. And
Yeah.
I suppose so, because everyone is interspersed in the flashbacks, but in the body, like the present day meat of the story, she's the last one to show up. But I don't know, I feel like she got just enough. Like, I have and it also, she's the one who's been completely by herself as far as we know this whole time. I don't know. Like I get what you're saying, but I don't have that.
Also, I do, and I'm gonna get to more of my positives here in a minute. But just one thing I'd like to point out: the whole warrior, the goddess of war,
Athena.
Athena, yeah, her being the token one to like have this memory fracture thing. I feel like that subplot was kind of undercooked. Like I don't know why. It's just her specifically, and no one else has had this issue before.
I don't know. I didn't have an issue with it. Like you wouldn't want them to do it with more than one because then that's just redundant.
Well, I mean, not
That's-
with the main characters, but like having never seen it on anyone else, like on screen, even in passing, was kind of just like, okay, like I don't have that problem, but I see what you're saying.
I guess.
And I could have used a little information as to why exactly the gods felt like they had to give them like their own like sentience and independence, because they make the deviants as just feral creatures and eventually lose control of them. But why not just make stagnant, legit robots that just follow orders as opposed to sentient life that don't have the capacity to disobey you and do what the Eternals end up doing at the end of this movie?
I think that's maybe something we should have talked about a little more, because I do think like some allusions to what the situation that is supposed to be are there, but it's not entirely clear because of the way that Arishem the Celestial describes it. He says that they made the Eternals to be incapable of evolution, and yet they are so obviously capable of evolution, at least in the sense that a person evolves and changes with time, some of them more so than others, obviously. But I think that speaks to something like the Eternals and the Deviants have the same issue, which is that by their mere existence being the way that they are, they kind of disprove the Celestials as these all wise, all knowing beings. Because the Celestials just straight up come out and say, we made the Deviants to be this way. There was a flaw in the design. We messed up. They ended up different than they were supposed to. And then immediately afterwards, he says, we made the Eternals to be this way. And everything in the movie tells us that that did not work either. So I wish there was a little bit more dialogue about that. But the way that I took that was the Eternals, like they have personalities and stuff, sure, maybe just so that they can interface with humans better. But they were not supposed to have sentience and free will to the degree that they do. And the Celestials just screwed up a second time.
See, I can buy more into that second explanation you just gave, because the whole interfacing with humans thing, I'm not really buying that, because they've been doing this process for millions of years. As far as we know, Midgard is the only planet with actual humans on it. I mean, sure, Thor's people look human, but they're not human. So
I say humans in this specific case. As a general rule, assume I mean just like whatever the sentient life that they're protecting is.
But the thing is, when we see the doubles, they all have the facial features of the people that we see as the Eternals.
You could put like blue skin on them or something. Like human facial structures is pretty much a universal constant from what we've seen in these movies so far. Like most of the sentient life looks like people.
Fair enough, I guess. I like that they. I mean, it's kind of funny because we don't really see her doing a ton in action scenes, but the actual leader of the Eternals not only gets taken out really quick, but her power isn't even offensive.
Yeah,
like, she can't even use her actual power in a fight.
And like I like that because I like that. Well, for one, I like that as Twitter has so helpfully put it, we split the team up into 5 nerds and 5 jocks. But I also just like that Ajak, the one who was the leader is the one with the power that's the most compassionate. She's got the most compassionate personality. Like everyone in the movie, to varying degrees, spends a lot of it going, Icarus might as well be the leader. Like he's the strongest, he's the most effective in a fight. Like when it comes down to having to face him in the end, it's like he's practically invincible compared to some of us. Fighting him is basically like signing our death warrant, but it's the more compassionate ones who are really there to like take the bridle of leadership because that's what matters.
Yeah, and I think the movie really like that's when everything switched up for me. When we get rid of her so early. I'm like, well, okay. This
Yeah,
is actually something very, very new than what we've come to expect from these movies.
I didn't hate that because I wasn't super attached to her.
Well, I mean, at that point in the story, I doubt anyone was, but also just like, and this is part of why I appreciate Marvel's really good at this in general, but this movie in particular really kept things close to the chest in terms of marketing, because that's Salma Hayek. She's not in the trailers a ton, but like she's in it enough, and we see her alive and doing things that getting to the first 20-30 minute mark and she's dead, you're like, oh, there's some stakes. Like these guys could die. Like one of them's dead. It was the leader, and it was one of the biggest names in the cast. So
Yeah, in the movie, that's the fine line to walk, and I really like is that I get why you're not like super impressed by that, Brianna, just because we weren't super invested in her at that point from just like story wise. But
I love it because of that. I hate it when people die that I actually like. I get angry. So this was perfect.
But I think the cool thing about that scene though is it's super tragic for the characters, but the movie's not like screaming at you to feel sad and cry about it.
yeah,
Like the movie's not pretending like it's earned your investment to that point where you should feel sad about it, but you get what the characters are feeling.
yeah, and like I think I don't know. Before I get into anything else, I have like sort of 3 little dumb complaints, which are really my only complaints with the movie. Like the only criticism of this movie that I've heard widespread that I agree with at all is that the CG on Pip the Troll in the mid-credit sequence
Oh yeah.
is garbage. Worst CG effect that we've seen in any of these movies since 2008. It's astonishing.
I'm good.
I agree with that. I was worried about the deviants and like us having to fight another horde of CGI creatures. Was surprised that a lot of those action scenes like ended up being super tense and super thrilling,
Yeah.
and they looked like they were actually there the whole movie. Like the effects on them were pretty top notch, no complaints, except for the one that like actually gets sentient and then has like more human features later. That guy looked super wonky, like a PlayStation 3 video game character at points.
Right.
But other than that, like I don't have any major complaints about the effects aside from that garbage post credit scene that
And, like,
looked like a Lord of the Rings game that wasn't
It was
finished.
honestly Harry Styles that took me out. So who is this? I had to pull out my phone. Like I have to be seeing the wrong person, right? Like I had to look up the actual like cast list for this movie because I was like, I think this is Harry Styles objectively, but like I could totally just be like, no, this is like a white guy. I'm mistaking him for something as someone else. Like, what? Who? This is not Harry Styles. Like that's not who I'm looking at. But you know what? You know what? It was. What a time to be alive.
One of the things I love about this movie is that it's not trying to be like your standard crowd pleaser, like Blockbuster, the way that a lot of MCU movies are. Like most
Yeah,
of
this movie is very talky and philosophical, and we get plenty of action scenes, but we also, again, have a lot of that. Not at least it didn't to me anyway feel too overly expository, where it's like I I'm being explained things for the next plot point to happen. It felt as character focused as it could have.
Yeah,
mean-
I say that to say, like, both of my theaters that I saw this with, well, this is mainly for the first viewing, didn't have all of those big crowd reactions that you would expect from an MCU movie until Harry Styles showed up, and then the cheers, the
It
cheers.
was so like I literally you hadn't even seen the movie yet, and I texted you while the post credit scene was going on, like whomstead who is this? Are we really seeing this? Like that was the one thing. Okay, the movie had its own share of like shock value stuff and things that made me go, oh, no way. But like that really caught me. Congratulations to them.
Oh God, you would have simultaneously loved and hated to see it with the crowd I saw it the second time, because I take my mom to see this, and like the theater has been rented out basically by a middle school trip.
Nope. That ain't it. Goodbye.
They were mostly pretty all right.
Nope.
There was
And then the sex scene happens.
the sex scene
Yeah.
happened. They did react to that. They reacted for whatever reason. I'm not 100% sure why. They reacted very strongly to the scene where Gilgamesh and Sprite sort of like bring Thena out of her madness for a bit. Like I don't know why that got to them. And when the twist happens and we find out that Icarus killed Ajak, you hear a lot of people be like, "Oh, son of a bitch! What an asshole!" And one kid is just going, "Why? Why?
Yeah.
like 5 times.
Yeah, I see it. I do.
But yeah, my other, and like we can, like I want to put a pin in the Deviants because effects wise, I agree they were really great. They felt like they were there in every scene, and part of that is the direction. I really like that they all have pretty unique designs relative to each other. But if there's one complaint about the movie that I understand but don't agree with, it's the handling of the Deviants. But I want to put a pin in that because my other dumb complaint is the aspect ratio changes. The first time I saw this, it was in IMAX, and like going from
Yeah, if you're gonna do that, you gotta just bite the bullet and shoot the whole movie in IMAX.
yeah,
That drives me insane.
because going back and forth like 5 times in the span of a couple minutes is just too much. It was very
Thankfully,
much.
I mean, I never even, unless I know for sure it's all shot in IMAX, I never see a movie like that. I just see it in Dolby.
The first time I saw it, I didn't actually get the tickets. I have a friend who likes to like buy bulk tickets whenever an MCU movie comes out and get a bunch of people together, and we always see it in IMAX. And we've never had this problem before, so this was a surprise to me when it happened.
I'm trying to remember what movie it was that shot all. It was Infinity War. Infinity War was the first movie made here in the States to shoot an entire film in IMAX.
Wow, I didn't even know that. But there's one like actual thing that's like a story theme thing that bothers me, and I feel like it's for certain that neither of you had this, but let me see anyway. Because the scene where we're in Phastos' house and we're recruiting him and bringing him back on, he has this line about how, like, oh, it makes sense why they never wanted us to interfere with human wars because wars lead to the creation of life-saving medicine and technology. And that felt like a really weird sentiment to have someone say in this movie, which
I feel like it's purely factual, so it suits him. Like
maybe,
that is not even in the slightest untrue.
but like I'm wondering if it's factual to the extent that it makes sense to be a thing the Celestials want, because we find out that the Celestials' main goal is just increase the population, get more people on the planet as quickly as possible so that one of us can be born from like the energy of people just existing on Earth.
So
And-
here's the thing about that, if I may interject.
Oh yeah, sure.
Sorry to cut you off, Nick. But so the thing about that explanation that doesn't work, where it's like, oh, we didn't get involved with the Thanos situation because deviants weren't involved. It's like, okay, but your main leader guy is all about the population. It's not even actually what you think it is. It's all purely wanting the population to be as big as it can be. and Thanos is trying to cut the population of everyone in half.
That's
so
another thing where, like,
that's still not a good explanation.
I'm fine with it because the one giving us that explanation is the person who's not in the know. Like, when we get that scene, it's Cersei explaining what she and the others were told, which is if deviants aren't involved, don't do anything. And I totally buy that. Given the way Infinity War plays out, no one in this movie could be sure that Thanos was going to succeed or even what he was doing in the time frame of that movie. So the way I picture it is that Ajak and Icarus are the only two who know what the Celestials really want. Infinity War happens over the span of like
Literally like a day.
yeah, so I imagine that whole thing happens and half the population is gone before either of them even think to do anything about it. Especially since Thanos only arrives on Earth in Wakanda, and I wouldn't be surprised if even the Eternals didn't know that Wakanda existed.
Oh, I think they know it exists, but why would they go down there? Like, one of them is teaching in London, so she's not going to freaking Wakanda. The other one's with her. The other one's out in the Courage the Cowardly Dog house in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like, none of them have any reason to be in
And again,
Wakanda.
the only two who know that they should get involved if deviants aren't a factor are Ajak and Icarus. And like, yeah, I totally believe
That
that
between the two of them and the two of them alone, that's not like no one's gonna do anything. About that.
it's immaterial. The question of does it really make sense from the Celestials' perspective that they
Also,
wouldn't
I
help
feel
with
like-
Thanos because only two of them would know to do that, and
even if
they probably
did,
wouldn't have the means to anyway.
one, correct, they wouldn't. But also, it's like if I found out that, like, I don't know, God sent me somewhere to go clean up the earth and just increase the human population at will, I'd probably bring that to him. Like, hey, I heard there's an alien coming to like stomp out 50% of the entire galaxy, and not
Can you
only is
take
that
care of
gonna,
that
like,
real quick?
not only is that going to put a damper on your plans on Earth, but also everywhere at the same time. And like Ajak knows that, so I feel like even if she knew that Thanos was coming, she'd probably be like, well, if we were supposed to do something, I would have gotten an order about that. Our orders are as they are; they have
Yeah.
not changed. So I'm gonna just let that sit.
And I do want
Yeah.
to talk more about the Thanos factor of it because there's something that I really like that this movie does. But
Well, you guys have cleared that up for me, basically. Like
yeah,
Nice.
Yeah,
it's not
that's-
like Transformers 2 where the Decepticons come down and it's like, we're taking over now. And they're like controlling all the prompts. Like they literally just have their henchmen show up in New York to get one of the stones away from Doctor Strange and then they leave.
yeah. But also, just to bring it back around to my point with Phastos, I just think it's weird that since the Celestials' priority is more people faster on the planet as much as possible, like sustain human life in the greatest quantity you can until one of us can be born, it's weird. That's very utilitarian. And the movie ultimately becomes a debate sort of about the utilitarianism, and it's about faith also. Like clearly, like Kingo and Icarus are doing a utilitarian thing, but they're doing it out of faith. They're doing it because the Celestial is my god, I listen to him, his design is ultimately what's best. But when we get to that argument of like sort of the pro-life, pro-choice thing of is it better to get rid of the lives that are here now at the expense of lives that could come in the future later? And I think you're right, Malik, that the movie doesn't tell you to feel one way or the other about that argument, but ultimately the story of the movie sides with life here now in the moment should be prioritized because that's the side that we let win in the end. It's weird to me that one of our good guys, who's like a good guy till the very end, just kind of very casually says this thing to the effect of, well, ultimately war is better for human life long term. I don't know if I believe that, and I don't know if I.
War isn't better for human life long term. It's better for producing means of longevity in a very quick sense. That's like saying if you need to feed everyone with chickens,
Like
you can't
we
make
advance in
lots
times
and
of
throw
war.
them in the dark. But is that good chicken and is that good for the chickens? No. But it's what you do when you need it like ASAP with a
We
quick.
come up with medicine because soldiers are dying. We
Because
come up with
everyone's
the
dying.
atomic bomb because yeah.
It's like how we had, and you can really tie that to real world events because we didn't have proper funding for really important things, many of them, but one of them being like the CDC or other preventative measures for diseases and viruses and things like that. We don't have a lot of vaccines and a lot of cures for things because those projects are criminally underfunded constantly, except now the whole world was brought to a halt and very briefly they were given the money they needed to work as quickly as they possibly could. And the movie's making the same argument. Is it good? No. Is it the good thing to do? No. But is it what works? And is it what we wound up doing? Yes.
Yeah, you guys sound like, I don't know. You definitely sound like you know this better than me, because I don't know. I just had this moment on my second viewing where I was like, huh.
I don't think the movie is like telling you how to feel about that, but that is an undeniable fact.
Yeah. I don't know. It took me out of it for a moment where I was like, is that true enough that it would matter to the Celestials? And the way you're putting it, I guess it is.
I think it has to be because they're here. We spend all this time going, you're going to be here forever. But like, there is a time frame on it. It doesn't last forever. There's a specific time frame in which this has to get done. And that's what they're operating with, which is why Fastos, the one who like really wants, as we see later, like humans to thrive and do well and not, murder each other in huge amounts. And that's why he, out of everyone, is the one saying that. Because they're on a time crunch. They got to get it done.
And like, I really like the degree to which this movie really makes the most out of having a cast as big as it is, because it really allows itself to have those kind of nuanced arguments. Because I feel like in another movie with a smaller cast, you would have somebody. Let me put it this way. I think in a different version of this movie that's a bit more streamlined, Druig and Fastos would be one character who likes humans enough to want them to advance, but also doesn't want them to hurt each other.
I agree with that.
And the movie benefits, I think, from having them be two characters who are separate, have very different beliefs, but like they converge in some ways. They have a clear conflict, even if they are on the same side in the end, and they still clearly do love each other like family. Like Druig is like, he straight up takes a bunch of humans, goes to the rainforest and stagnates because he does not value progress if it's at the expense of human life. He's like, I'll protect these humans from themselves if I have to force it on them. Where Fastos does value human life, but he also values progress. And he's like, we need to help them advance. That's how you really express your love and care for them, is to help them move forward. And then when he sees like the really negative extreme of that, he's like, oh man, Druig was right. Like, I really like that the movie gets to be that sort of nuanced about it.
This isn't something that I like ever really need checked off for me, and really something I even ever bring up. But I gotta touch on here just because I think it's handled really well. This movie definitely has some solid representation. Like, I typically cringe at making the black guy the token gay character in the movie or show, but I liked his character.
Fastos was cute.
Yeah, I liked him. Like, the movie didn't need to make a big deal out of his orientation. It was just there. It was on screen. What bothered me more than anything was just how much I feel that we still have a bit of a ways to go, because I could see like the dude sitting next to me cringe when he was kissing his husband, and I could feel like half the theater cringing.
I thankfully didn't have that, and I was surprised that was not.
Probably by virtue of where we are in particular.
That's true. But I was surprised that wasn't something that any of the middle schoolers reacted to.
They're middle schoolers. It's not. They wouldn't. Not their generation of middle schoolers. Maybe ours. Maybe before us. But them, no, not now. Not unless they're from a not a large metropolitan city.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I definitely agree, Malik, that we have a ways to go. But this, more than anything we've gotten from like a big studio movie in a while, I feel like was a tangible step in the right direction.
And not just that, like we have the sign language girl. I mean, I don't know how many deaf people are out there, but I'm sure they're out there, and
interest
they
in
watch these.
learning sign language spiked after.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, for a Marvel movie to be able to do that, like that's awesome.
Yeah. But to bring it around back to the Thanos bit, I really like that this movie strikes kind of a perfect balance of feeling like it could be its own self-contained like science fiction movie that has nothing to do with comic books or Marvel or whatever, but also having its existence as part of the MCU baked into its narrative in a really interesting, compelling way that retroactively makes Avengers Endgame feel more meaningful. Like, this entire story happens because the events of Avengers Endgame inspired Ajak and made her feel like that was the tipping point for her, is the Avengers, like humanity, bounces back from this terrible thing that was the end of Infinity War. She sees that happen and she's like, yeah, you know what? There's something special about these humans. Like, we can't go forward with this. And it's really interesting that you don't have to have seen that movie for this movie to make sense. But it's this really interesting, like, integral tie between these two things that really justifies this movie being set in the MCU, retroactively makes Endgame feel more meaningful. It's a really interesting thing. And it hits in a way with that story decision that it doesn't always hit with in these movies.
I would say that this is probably the MCU's strongest movie since Infinity War. I'm not gonna say my favorite. I think, like, in terms of like pure entertainment, I like Shang-Chi a little more than this. But I do think this is a better story.
Which is interesting because it's so opposite to Infinity War in the way that it's like its priorities and the execution to get there. Because what makes Infinity War so strong is that it's a very like mechanically sound, fast-paced, like boom, 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 convey information, get the stuff done, hit the necessary.
Yeah, that's an epic. Like, that is a ride from start to finish.
Yeah, and like I'd argue this is an epic too, but it's more of a like epic about human nature, where
it's a little more somber and introspective,
slower, more methodical. It spans a wider range. Like, we're talking about Infinity War, like we mentioned, spans a day. This movie spans thousands of years, and it really lets you sit in each of those moments. But
yeah, I think we just about covered it, man, unless there's anything else you want to hit.
Well, I mean, I don't know. We've talked about so much, but there's also just like
there's
whole characters who we haven't even mentioned yet.
Talk about the Deviants.
Yes, I do want to.
You did want to put a pin.
There was a thing with the Deviants where
the Deviants and Undertale being in the same place in my head would never have occurred. Ever.
Yeah, but like we haven't even talked about Kingo or Sprite, but to talk to
I don't like her.
To talk about
interesting. I don't like her.
To talk about the Deviants first, though, because this is really the only thing that people complain about with this movie where I go like, I get it. The one thing is that the Deviants, they're handled kind of strangely, where if you take them as the villains of this movie, which they're obviously not, but the main deviant, whose name is Crow, even though he doesn't get named in this movie, and that's maybe part of people's problems, he is such an interesting idea, and then people, I think, are understandably mad when we sort of axe him off without fully exploring that. And that, to a lot of people, feels like the movie overstuffed itself, and this guy, and to a lesser extent the Deviants as a whole, get underexplored despite being an interesting idea because the movie just didn't have enough time. I think the movie's doing something really interesting. And I think the fact that he never gets a name on screen is part of that, which is that for as compassionate and ultimately, I think, optimistic and heartwarming as this movie is thematically in a lot of ways, this movie seems very intentionally cruel to the deviants, and I think that's part of the point. And just like, as you say, we're not supposed to be sure if they made the right decision at the end, I don't think we're supposed to be sure if the way the deviants are treated throughout this film is fair, because they're basically just Icarus's tool. Because they're left on Earth just like the Eternals are, kind of aimless with this job that they were given, but as soon as they overextend their boundaries, just like the Eternals, the Celestials are like, nope, we got to nip this in the bud. This is a problem. And they're treated like these monsters when they weren't given the Eternals' level of intelligence. They weren't given sentience. They had to achieve that for themselves. And only when one of them does he realize this situation's messed up. We got the raw end of the deal. This is not fair. And then before he even really has the chance to make that case or find any path out of the cycle of violence, he gets killed. And the movie doesn't linger on it. It doesn't say anything about it. It just kind of lets that happen. And I think that's really interesting.
You're making all that sound really like masterful. I don't know if I buy that all of that is necessarily like super planned out.
I don't even know if it's on purpose, but it's
Yeah.
what I see when I look at the movie.
How you feeling about that, Brianna?
Well, the thing that Nick and I talked about the Deviants after he had come home and seen the movie. It was like 1:30 in the morning. We spent like an hour just talking about the Deviants alone. I thought that it's.
I got it.
Okay, thank you. I thought that I liked what they did with them. I know that a lot of people were like, I can't believe you made this villain come on screen, doesn't even get a name, and then he like immediately dies. And I was like, no, but that's the whole thing. The Eternals have been on this planet for 7 million years or something. Like, they have seen new species come into creation and then die. They've done this. People are like, I can't believe the Eternals killed that thing. Well, of course they did. Their one job is to protect humanity. They don't, like, they kind of go against that by not go against it, but like they defy their creator by not going along with the plan and doing what he wants them to do. But their sole objective is still keep the people of this planet safe. And deviants eat people. It doesn't matter how smart they are. It doesn't matter how much you might want to think that someday a deviant could become a vegetarian or eat a cow instead. We don't have time to wait for that. They are going to kill him. They're going to kill all of them, period. Because as far as they are aware, they're like giant lions let loose. And like, we don't have zoos for them. They will go into a city and just murk people. Ain't no hiding in the forest or living in the desert. Like, they will just kill people. So of course,
This is true.
Yeah.
Like, I am completely unsurprised by this development, but I thought it was really interesting that, like, the comment I made before, I was watching a while ago a YouTuber's video about Undertale, Super Eye Patch Wolf.
Yeah.
And kudos, love him. He was talking about how when you play Undertale, for anyone who has played Undertale, specifically, I think he mentioned it in the fight with Undine. I always say Undine, but some people say Undine.
Yeah,
I don't know. You can pause as many times as you want. You can try again as many times as you want. But in the scope of the game, she is just trying her best. Like, you are at you're at the clear advantage because you have time to memorize her attacks. You have time to get better. You can do this again and again and again. You can kind of step outside of that world and just be impartial to it. And the Eternals' whole thing is that they're not really impartial, but they do exist a touch outside of this world.
And like I love that you brought up memorization because that
Oh yes,
that-
Gilgamesh.
that because
That's another thing I talked about. That I'll leave that to you because you know what I said better than I know what I said.
not particularly about Gilgamesh, but like we mentioned Sprite and like the characters we haven't talked about yet, and a thing that came up that I thought was interesting, and this I'm sure there's no way was on purpose, because this is a thing that I have with Peter Pan that I don't know anyone else who has, but I thought it was really interesting that we bring up a Peter Pan comparison with Sprite when, and this is baked deeper into the movie than even I realized when you talk about this, like the degree that memories play into which of these characters do and don't have human nature. When the deviant kills Gilgamesh, the first thing that he talks about is his memories, her memories. I get it now because I'm able to comprehend memory. And the Celestials' way of like resetting these guys and just making them pawns for another mission is taking away their memories. Peter Pan is this story about memories and how kind of weirdly inhuman you can become when you start to forget things about yourself. Because there's a thing in the original telling of Peter Pan where there's just like little lines of dialogue that imply that the longer you stay in Neverland, the less you remember, and that makes you kind of weird to be around. And I think it's interesting that that comparison comes up for Sprite in a movie that, again, doesn't make a big deal out of this, isn't drawing a lot of attention to it, but is very much about the nature of memories and how that informs how much of a person that you're allowed to be, pretty much. And Thena, obviously, with the Mad Weary, is like she has too many memories, like too much. It's the burden of being an eternal, kind of, as you risk getting literal lifetimes of memories, several million years of memories, not just thousands. And that's enough to break a person and make them into an insane person. And I think that's a really interesting sort of undercurrent that the movie has going on. But a Sprite as a character in and of themselves, Brianna doesn't like them. I totally get that. I think,
if I may, can I talk about Sprite for a minute?
yeah, I just want to say that, like, I think months/years from now, when this movie has been like reappraised and people either decide that they still don't like it or they like it more than they do right now, Sprite is going to be the part of this movie that is controversial forever, I think.
Well, yeah. Well, I got big Monster Girl vibes.
Ooh, yeah.
With Sprite's character.
Invincible.
Oh, Brianna still hasn't seen Invincible, has she?
No.
I have not.
As graphic as that is, I think you'll have a lot. I think you'll actually be able to watch that versus The Boys.
You know what? I feel like you'd enjoy it. I do. Thinking about it, I've never really thought about would Brianna enjoy Invincible. I think you would.
That's more of a squarely superhero thing. It just has some more blood and it's a little more graphic, but it's animated. Versus a super nihilistic, like most superheroes would be terrible rapists and murderers in the real world, like The Boys is.
Yeah. But yes, definitely a big Monster Girl energy from Sprite. Agreed.
Which is kind of, it's unintentionally, well, not even unintentionally, but see, that's the weird thing. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but yeah, just because. So she wants to be an adult so badly, but she's in the like little girl body. Like it's good, and
like I think there's something like you're right to say it's not unintentional. She's very, very deliberately uncomfortable, and I think when we get to this is maybe the one thing where like the only aspect of this movie that I'd argue is maybe held back by being a PG-13 like studio Marvel Disney product, which is that I think there's an R-rated version of this movie that's maybe not better, but like it's R-rated because it goes whole hog into what makes Sprite tick instead of letting it be mostly implication. Because when the first we see of her is her trying to flirt with like an adult guy, and like
Yeah.
her illusion doesn't work and she just bails out of there. And when she ultimately sides with Icarus because she loves him, and I know a lot of people who react badly to that, like, oh man, this character's whole motivation and like alignment changed at the drop of a hat because she had a crush. And I'm like, it's more layered than that. Like
Although I
Sprite
don't fault them for that because, plainly speaking, I mean, it is kind of what happened. But
objectively, it's true, but
Yeah,
true.
that feels like a shallow decision that a kid would make, not someone who's been alive for 1,000 years.
except
it's-
she's never been able to conceptually grow up. She's around like parent figures or like equals, but who make jokes about her age and stature all the time, and then other humans who will always think she's maybe 16.
Sprite is bizarre, and like I give insane kudos to Leah McTeague. I think it's McTeague or yeah, Leah
Well,
McHugh?
she's great.
She's great, and I'm shocked that they found someone her age who can play a character who's this strange. Because Brianna and I discussed this. It's not just that she's ostensibly a child or like an adult mind stuck in a child's body. She's not really. It's not even as simple as something like Monster Girl. Because think about Monster Girl. She got to grow up, become an adult, and then get this power that regresses her back to a child. All of the other Eternals get to basically live adult lives. They never got to have childhoods, but they have functioning adulthoods. Sprite never had a childhood, cannot have an adulthood.
She exists nowhere. Like, to the people of this planet, she is a child. To her comrades, she is a comrade, but that's about it. She has no, in this world that she's been on for 7 million years, she has
Thousand,
no,
Lydia.
7,000, sorry. She has no control.
Yeah, she has no conception of herself as a child or an adult. So like it's creepy and weird, not just because this is a character played by a child actress who's attracted to an adult male played by an adult actor. It's also like this is a person who's not an adult, not a child, has not had 7,000 years of experience being either of those things really. And so when we turn her into a human at the end, that feels like it's a bit convenient because it's like, oh, I didn't even know that having leftover celestial power could do that to somebody, but fine. It's really the only way this character gets a happy ending. Because either you fix her condition and she gets to actually live a life of any kind, like a functioning person, or she just dies. Because when we get to the end, I don't think it's just that she loves Icarus. It's that she's
tired of being in this place.
She's like, I want to start over. I'm sick of 7,000 years of being me because my existence is purgatory and I want it to stop.
And she does lay that out right before a certain someone knocks her out, which was by far one of the funniest laughs I got in the whole movie.
I love Druig.
Druig is
She
the
said you ain't doing it. Period. You ain't doing it.
Druig is the MVP for me. And like this is true to a certain degree of all the characters. But Druig most of all is the one who's like so glad that he's barely in the marketing because he's such a surprise.
No, because okay, like I love Gemma Chan, I love Cersei, but let me lay it down. For anyone who is listening, I keep account of these in all the movies. Druig and Druig alone, besides Cersei, can fucking get it. I love him. Him and Makari.
And like he's so interesting because aesthetically, even performance-wise, and obviously his powers, everything about him screams bad guy. And we don't do that thing that like a lesser movie would do, which is like, oh, we tricked the audience into thinking that maybe Druig was shady, but as soon as it's confirmed that he's like a good guy, like we dress him up in brighter clothes, like the performance changes to be a bit more personable. No, Druig just is kind of
Druig is just that guy.
a moody guy, but his heart is undoubtedly in the right place. And like when we get to the bit in the fight scene where he's got all of the villagers like circling the deviant and shooting,
Oh, that was so dope.
it's so cool. Like it's such a cool use of his power, but it's also such a nice character beat where Cersei's like, "You're better than this." It's like it speaks to how he's been alone, just controlling these people this whole time for years and years. That he needs someone more empathetic like Cersei to come in and tell him to stop, but he really only needs to be reminded the once. Like he's not someone who once you remind him that this is wrong is gonna like fight you on that. He just needed to like get some perspective back. Like he's so cool. I love him. And I
Yeah,
also
very
want to,
very interesting character.
I also want to speak. There's really two more who I want to speak to because like Thena and Gilgamesh and Fastos, I do still think are really interesting, but they're less.
But before we move on to the other characters, I just want to say that Druid also reminded me. He gave me like a even younger, like, what the heck is his name? Michael Fassbender's Magneto, like that, like his swagger and his the sass that he has
Like the
from
righteous
First Class.
indignation.
Yeah. Like I got that vibe from him a lot. I dug that.
Yeah. But the ones that I really want to talk about is actually Gemma Chan as Cersei because
She a whole day.
I feel like Cersei is gonna be to a lot of people kind of a thankless role, and someone on Twitter who I've been discussing this movie with, who very much disagrees with me about it, said something that I don't think is really untrue, which is that for most of this movie, she's maybe the most passive protagonist that an MCU movie has ever had. And I really think that actually is kind of compelling because, and again, this ties into the Icarus angle. Basically, everyone in the movie, but especially her and Sprite and Kingo, even when Ajax, like little ball of leadership, goes into her and Ajax has chosen her as successor, they're all still defaulting to Icarus as the leader, basically. And Cersei is definitely doing that out of a lack of confidence, out of a lack of belief in herself. And Icarus turning is such a brilliant story choice, not just for all of the other reasons that we've already gone over, but because
It forces Cersei to step up.
yeah, it forces her in the final act to like finally decide to commit and do something. And I really like what stuck out to me on the second viewing is even after Icarus leaves and Kingo leaves, and we'll talk about that, the ones who are still in the room, Makari and Druig and Fastos, are kind of arguing amongst themselves about what they're going to do. And Druig is like, hey, Cersei, you might have to like do this in my place, worst case scenario, and kill the Celestial. And she doesn't have an immediate response to that. And Druig and Fastos kind of keep going back and forth until Cersei just kind of comes in with like, we can't do that. And she goes off, and like Bina has to come in and give her the pep talk because really Cersei is being faced with, she has to make the decision truthfully for the first time in the movie, and her first instinct is like, we can't do this, I can't do this, the Celestials are above us, I'm not the right person, this is wrong. But then given a moment, she's like, okay, how much do I care about humanity, how much do I care about Earth, am I willing to bite the bullet and do this thing that is completely outside of my nature to save them? And she's like, yeah. It's like, I love that. I love that whole stretch of things for her character. And also back to that fight scene, the bit with where she like turns part of the tree into water so it falls, and she turns it into metal so it falls on the deviant. That was awesome.
That was pretty cool, yeah. Gilgamesh. My first exposure to that actor was from a little movie you might have heard of called Train to Busan,
Yeah.
and he was awesome in that movie.
Love
So I was really excited to see him here, and he of course brings that same badassery and like lovable guy with like a big heart. Like he was great.
When he just bitch slapped that one deviant, I was like,
Oh yeah, thunderous applause.
that was amazing. But yeah, he's another one who's like, you could he's not in the movie a ton, but the time that he gets is all perfectly well spent, and you get really, really endeared to him. So it's like I got sort of nervous when we got to the fight scene and he and Thena kind of separated. And I was like, oh man, he's fighting this guy by himself. I don't know how I feel about that. I really don't want anything bad to happen to this guy. And then it does, and I feel bad.
As we all do and should.
But yeah, he was great. Angelina Jolie was great. Kingo, yes, Kumail
Yeah, and
Nanjiani.
she's wonderfully kind of understated and underused for just the fact that she's in this movie at all and playing a fairly major character.
Yeah, which
Like we find out they're getting Angelina Jolie, and I'm like, okay, so she's gonna probably be top billing. She'll probably have most, if not the second most screen time out of any other character in the movie. And they used her very sparingly.
yeah, and like it's good because when that happens, you can tell that they didn't do it as like a stunt casting thing. They got Angelina Jolie to play a character.
And yeah, and I was very impressed by that, especially from as we already talked about with Ajax.
Mm. But like another one of the more interesting ones to me, and like again, everyone here is so interesting. But to round off with Kumail Nanjiani as Kingo, is he's so fascinating, and like the way that he's used, because a lot of people. Another thing that I just don't understand. A lot of people got
I
mad.
kept waiting to be annoyed by his assistant.
He's great.
I love
Karun is great. He's basically the heart of the movie.
I was waiting for him to be that like super annoying joke that by the third one we just like, okay, it's cringy now, get rid of this character. But that never happened.
Yeah, no, like he's incredibly endearing, and I think it was the Infinity podcast that made the really good point, which is like he is the stand-in for humanity amongst these gods. He is probably the closest in the movie who comes to straight up just being the voice of Chloe Zhao. And so it makes all the sense in the world that he is literally the guy filming an Eternals movie inside the Eternals movie.
One of my favorite bits with him is when they're like, yeah, you can go. And he's like, what, just go back to my house and just sit around, watch TV? The world's about to end.
Yeah, and it's like I want to be by your side. Like I want to be chronicling the adventures of the heroes who are going to try and save the world. And like Kingo is so interesting because again, a lesser movie wouldn't have had the balls to make such a sort of like off-putting decision with who is ostensibly the comic relief, where he's really likable, he's really charming, he's where the majority of the laughs come from. And yet when we get to the third act, he's like, no, I think Icarus is correct. Like, I share his beliefs, but I'm not going to fight any of you over it. I'm sitting this one out. And I know people who got mad at the movie because they're like, well, that's just bad setup and payoff. Like, why would you just completely drop one of your characters for the third act and not have them show up or get mentioned at all? And I'm like,
He said he wasn't gonna show up.
yeah, like, what are you talking about? Like, this isn't Han Solo. Like, I think people maybe conditioned themselves to expect the Han Solo trope where, like, because we do it in everything, where they dip out and then they dip back in because, like, no, haha, really,
yeah, I'm
proof.
not gonna help you. And then they show up at the last possible second to save the hero out of some super dire situation.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, Black Panther did that, and it's like that's an effective trope, and but we always
But
use
it's
that as shorthand for
super,
like,
yeah, it's super cliche, and we could
yeah,
do it.
because it's easy, effective shorthand for a character who you're not certain is like a capital G good guy, and then it turns out yes they are. And this movie is better than that because it has someone who, like he says, does care about humanity to an extent. He has a lot of empathy, both for human beings and his family in the Eternals, but also he's he's got a staunch belief system. The Celestials are his capital G god, and he's not going to defy their design because he has such complete faith in them and in Icarus. And I like that he and Sprite and Icarus are the ones who sort of have the deepest relationship with each other, and they're the ones who ultimately can't bring themselves to side with the other ones at the end. But also, Kingo, unlike Sprite and Icarus, has steeped himself in human culture and has really allowed himself to connect with them. And so it makes perfect sense that he's the one who splits right down the middle. And like that we introduce it's such a the meta like movie within a movie stuff that's going on with him and Karun is so interesting because but also Kingo, unlike Sprite and Icarus, has steeped himself in human culture and has really allowed himself to connect with them. And so it makes perfect sense that he's the one who splits right down the middle. And like that we introduce it's such a the meta like movie within a movie stuff that's going on with him and Karun is so interesting because but also Kingo, unlike Sprite and Icarus, has steeped himself in human culture and has really allowed himself to connect with them. And so it makes perfect sense that he's the one who splits right down the middle. And like that we introduce it's such a the meta like movie within a movie stuff that's going on with him and Karun is so interesting because but also Kingo, unlike Sprite and Icarus, has steeped himself in human culture.
Stick to it.
Mhm.
Love to see that. His choice was a bit odd for me, but I didn't hate it. It was just something that I took in par for the course of this movie because, like I told you, Nick, I think that this movie was great, but it was clunky in the same way that Malignant was. Like it's shaping up to be something fantastic, but it feels like a passion project. It feels like a work of love. It's a love letter to the people of the planet, and I like it for that.
And I also do think what stops it from feeling clunky for me is that, as we've been saying, it doesn't feel like the movie's telling you to feel any sort of way about it. Like, this is just naturally the decision that Kingo would make. I can't buy that he would do anything else. And the movie just kind of lets it sit there. And you, as a viewer, decide, are you okay with this? Do you hate Kingo for making this decision? You totally could. Like, not like hate him as a character in the movie, but hate him as like a figure who would choose to do that. You can have that reaction to him, and it's perfectly valid. And I don't know. I admire the brass balls on the movie to do that.
I think we're ready to hop over to What If.
Yes, the other MCU project this year that's taken a really big swing and has been met with kind of mixed results for that. Which, I mean, hey, thematic cohesion between these two things. So, yeah, you two actually just finished this show for the first time tonight. So I don't know if one of you wants to go first with like a fresh feeling about this season overall.
Of what if?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
when I first heard that they were doing this,
Also, you're kind of muffled
like-
for whatever reason.
He's not muffled. It's just the volume's very low. Is your laptop on?
Let me see.
okay, hold on. Is that better?
A little bit, yeah.
This is okay.
This
Cool.
works.
So I when I first heard they were doing the concept, I'm like, that's cool, that's interesting and all. Don't get too cutesy with it, and I really don't want to see zombies. Just don't do zombies.
Oh boy.
And zombies was everything I was afraid it would be.
Oh, no.
Oh boy.
Yeah. First
I'm
of all, I
trying
don't
not
like
to
that
jump right
concept.
into zombies because that's the one that I have the most problems with.
Well, I mean, I guess
Well,
it's fine.
well, so here's the thing. Like both of you know that I'm also a rabid horror fan, but I don't care to see my favorite superheroes zombified and eating each other. Like I just don't like that premise anyway. But just to see the way they handled it here and how obnoxiously like Venom Levy goofy it was, like that tone did not even fit the situation. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. It's I suppose we'll eventually get into it episode by episode. I did not care for zombies, and I'll expand on that later.
Well,
But
but before you get into how you feel about it, Nick, I want to just
yeah,
say
sorry.
that I had a weird viewing experience with this. So as it was coming out, I just felt super apathetic about it. Didn't wasn't super jazzed about watching it. So I ended up watching episode 4 without any of the context of the first 3, and then sat on it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then finally yesterday binged all of it. So I enjoyed the Carter stuff. I enjoyed getting to see T'Challa as Star Lord, and is interesting and like borderline, well, not even borderline, but as repetitive as that story got with like Strange's friend constantly dying. I really ended up liking where that went. It was kind of dark and super tragic and sad, and I enjoyed it. Um, and then what other story did I really dig? I'm trying to remember. I don't know. It's starting to blend together. But I did not like the whole goofy Thor partying on Asgard thing, and that was very like Ragnarok on steroids with like bubblegum and candy, and I could not stand it. Um, and the Ultron winning thing was kind of cool. Um, yeah, it was cool. But I think by far my favorite episode was somebody's killing the Avengers before they're even the Avengers.
Yep.
And it was focusing mostly on Samuel Jackson. Like I thought that was really cool.
Brianna, what do you think about the season as a total package, I guess?
I would have to say I don't really care for it. Most episodes made me very mad. The last one didn't, which was nice. My favorite episode of the whole thing. But like, is it something that I think I'd sit down and watch twice? No. The zombie episode was okay. I didn't mind that. The one where the Avengers died before they could become the Avengers, very very cool premise at the very least. Liked that. And I don't know, maybe it was just that I couldn't conceive of these characters in so many different ways. But I don't know. Nick also had said that like his concept of the characterization of these people was also like really different from what we're used to. So maybe that's why I didn't jive with any of them. It just felt disjointed to me. Like it didn't mesh well with my sensibilities and what I like to watch, but it was okay. I think the last episode was really well done, and I liked that a lot, especially because of Peggy. See, that's how we could have done things. That's how we could have done things. Let me say it one more time for the people in the back. That's how we could have done things. But we got what we got.
Like I wouldn't have minded. Now see, Captain America remains my favorite Avenger. I wouldn't trade that for the world. But I would not mind to see Peggy Carter like become Captain Carter in live action. Like I'm here for that.
Mm-hmm.
That can happen.
I wouldn't have minded that at all. I just like that we get to, well, because we do spoilers, so fine. We get to the end and she's like, haven't I earned my, happy ending or whatever? I want to go somewhere else. And he's like, no, because people need you there. And she's like, you know what? You're right. Okay. And I'll go. I was like, here we get
the thing that I said that we could have had, but we didn't have. We got it here in this iteration that I don't even like. But like, thank you. That made me so happy. And then that Captain Carter gets to meet Captain America, which is like the best. The best conceivable end is that end. That is point blank, period. The bet like that redeems Steve Rogers for me, and he didn't even do anything.
So my thing.
So I think. Oh, sorry, Nick.
No, sorry. You should probably finish up what you were going to say.
Okay. So conceptually, I think what I was most excited for was Killmonger interacting with Tony Stark, and ultimately,
Oh my!
it's cool.
Oh my god!
She's
It's
really
cool
mad
as-
about that episode.
I hate him! I hate
Yeah,
him! I hate
so-
him! I hate him! I hate him! I hate him!
So as cool as that was, I did not probably much like Brianna, I did not care for like us leading to him killing Tony, because I thought that the whole point of this was us getting to see these characters develop in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise because of different circumstances.
There's no version
So
of
I
this
don't
guy that's
like-
not a dick.
And I don't like that.
I do. Makes sense to me. You can't put him anywhere and have him do a good thing.
But
Nowhere.
I see what Malik's saying. Like, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of the show? Because, and that was a big complaint that people had about that episode in particular, which is basically, oh, so this what if is just what if Killmonger did basically his same plan, but slightly more covertly and 8 years earlier.
And just killed Tony after fabricating this entirely fake friendship with him.
Unsurprising.
And like, I don't mind it just because I thought it was fun to watch the plan unfold, and the interactions that we do get with them are interesting. Like, Killmonger and Tony Stark are not two characters who I ever would have thought to pair together and like draw parallels with in the first place, but it seems like the most natural thing in the world. So like, ultimately I came down net positive on that episode. Overall, I think this show has, like Brianna mentioned, a pretty big characterization problem. And I don't know if it's just that, okay, because the MCU fandom sometimes has a thing that I have never had, which is that you will see people say that characters are like wildly out of character in some projects as compared to others. Like, there are people who will go like, man, I can't believe that Steve was so out of character in Age of Ultron. Why can't he always be more like Civil War, where he's way more in character? Like, for me, the movies and the other shows have, for the most part, done as good of a job as I could imagine anyone doing, making all of these characters feel like the same people, movie to movie, even when they're written by different writers and directed by different directors. This show is the first thing I don't have that with, and I have it pretty hard, because it feels like the writers, and there's only 2 screenwriters throughout all 9 episodes of this show, it feels like these writers are new to this franchise and have not gotten a handle on the characters they're writing. And that's...
No, this feels like quasi fan fiction.
Yeah. And like, you would think that that wouldn't be a problem given the premise of this show, but it extends beyond the changes that we're told are being made. So, like, when we have episode 2 and our big nexus point, our big change is, okay, T'Challa got taken into space instead of Peter Quill, and that led to all of these other cascading changes. All right. And then we get Thanos on the team. Okay, that's a pretty big ask, but I'll give it to you. Like, Thanos being convinced away from his mission by T'Challa, sure, whatever. We don't know when T'Challa got to him, what Thanos' circumstances were at the time. I'll give the episode that maybe he got his mind changed.
Did I mention that the idea was practical?
Yeah, but like, the way that everyone reacts to Thanos just being around, that's too far for me. like that Nebula and everyone else is just kind of cool with Thanos just hanging out as part of the team. Like it doesn't ruin the episode for me, but it's kind of a weird like I don't think you understand those characters if you think anyone would react to Thanos like this after the things that we know that he's still done, the many genocides that he is still committed, the abuse that he has still put Nebula through. It's real weird that no one reacts to this the way that you would expect them to react to it.
I'm
then
a sadistic tyrant, but also a lovable Ravenger.
Yeah. And like it kind of continues on from there, where episodes will do weird things that like there's no episode of this show that I feel gets it 100% right. Like the Doctor Strange episode I like a lot. It's a really big ask to suddenly introduce this whole like fixed points in time thing and have it be something that we know for a fact is not a fixed point in the timeline of the movies. And that's where you kind of have to be like, okay, up to now, the MCU has used timelines and universes basically interchangeably. So I guess, question mark, I can take it that a fixed point in one timeline isn't a fixed point in another. But it's such a weird thing to just throw at us to be like, well, you know, this character who survived up to the end of Doctor Strange and is still alive in the movies right now. In this episode, she has to die. There's no getting around it. Otherwise, Stephen Strange doesn't become Sorcerer Supreme. But, like, I watched the movie where that's not true. What are you talking about? And
Because of that, go ahead, Nick. I was just gonna say, because of that, I hit up a friend of mine who had already watched the show as I was watching it, and she told me that was her worst. That was like her least favorite episode because of the fridging, just for the tragedy of the male character or whatever. I mean that's kind of the whole point. Like and what got me is that they did like I think 2 whole scenes of them like actually like talking. Like I feel like even if you haven't seen that movie, they do enough to invest you into that relationship so that you do care and you want to see them figure out how to stop the death from happening.
Yeah, it's a really I think that's a really well executed episode. It's just that it's one example of a consistent problem throughout this show, which is whether it be plot or character or even tone, you kind of have to just you can't really take it as part of the MCU because it's so out of step with everything that's been established about the reality of the world. And like that's fine.
I wouldn't have an issue with that if they weren't straight up like rehashing and re-homaging and rearranging so many moments from those movies.
Yeah, like
as opposed to just coming up with new twists on the characters and making wholly original stories.
And like on the one hand, I get why practically you would do that because the movies are what your audience is familiar with, and you can be like, remember when this happened in the movie? Well, that's the setup to keep in mind as we make this change. And like that, it makes it easier to deliver these stories in a short form way where we can afford to have these episodes be like 30-ish minutes because we don't have to spend 10 minutes being like, well, this is what Thor or T'Challa or whoever's like in this particular universe, you remember, right? Just remember the movie and you'll be all set.
And what I really detest about that though is I feel like a lot of these, well, not even necessarily a lot, but a fair amount of these episodes are not given enough time. Especially the zombie one. Like we got the ending for that, and I was like, there's no effing way that's there's no effing way that's your ending.
And like
unless you're doing a 2-parter, like,
which is, I know a lot of people who felt that way about a lot of episodes, and were like, well, we don't know, we could get a follow-up to that next season, so we'll reserve
and
judgment.
now that I know that we're not just getting a follow-up, we're getting like a whole Marvel Zombies show now, and I'm like,
we're getting a what?
Oh yeah, Marvel Zombies
yeah
show. But But I was gonna say
Well,
that,
and
like,
not no, because I'm sure people enjoyed that, but like, I don't make me sit through that one. I'm not watching.
I know that there
Yeah,
were a lot of
I'm not watching
people
it either.
who, with that episode and the
Especially if
Killmonger,
they zombify my boy Spider-Man. If
Yeah.
they zombify Spider-Man, I riot.
I know that with that episode and the Killmonger one, and even the murder mystery one, there were a lot of people who were like, well, it didn't go exactly where I wanted to, but it's fine. We'll probably get a follow up next year. And then the finale happens and kind of wraps up those loose ends. So it's like, oh no, we won't get that. We really are kind of just stuck with the story they gave us in 30 minutes. And it's like, I get a lot of people's frustration with that. And like the zombie episode is the biggest offender of all of the show's recurring problems. Not having enough time, the characterization being off.
No, but like the Thor one, the Thor we get in this iteration of this in particular is so
Well, there's
aggravating.
there's things because my relationship with this show is like peaks and valleys. Because over the course of the 9 weeks of watching it, I kind of got myself to a place where I was like, you know what? I kind of have to take this show on its own terms. Because the first time that I watched that Thor episode, I reacted to it basically like you guys did. Like, why are we doing this? This is so dumb.
Goofy.
And then I'm like, you know what? This is 7 episodes in, and I've had this problem enough times with, like, I'm not sure why this show is doing what it's doing. I kind of just have to take it on its own terms. Like, it kind of cheats to get there, again, because it markets and pitches itself as something that's iterating on the movies.
Yeah, but those are the terms, Nick. You can't compare yourself to the movies and then, like, not be up to criticism for how you're handling,
Yeah, no,
changing
I
up
think
things
it's
that happen in the movies.
it's absolutely valid criticism, but for the sake of my own enjoyment and like finding more to like in it, I was like, fine. This episode's gonna be like a Looney Tunes cartoon starring Thor and all of the space characters. All right, I'll treat it like that's what it is. And on those terms, I think the jokes work. The action is pretty fun. Like taking it for what it's trying to be in 30 minutes, I'm like, all right, fine. Not what I would have done, but if I just accept that it's gonna be a goofy romp, sure, fine. As goofy romps go, it could be much, much worse. The Doctor Strange,
There's a really cool throwdown between Thor and Captain Marvel.
yeah,
It does go on a little too long and like is aping Dragon Ball Z pretty hard. But for like a good like 2-3 moments, they were having some really cool choreography going on between them.
yeah, and like the Doctor Strange thing, this fixed point in time thing is really dumb and doesn't make sense. Fine, whatever. That's what the episode wants to do. It wants to be the time machine, so I'm just gonna roll with it. And rolling with it, it's a really, really good episode. But I don't know, just this episode, not this episode, this series just begs for too many asks. It makes too many like gimmies, and it falls under the weight of those after a while. And I keep coming back to the zombies episode because it suffers the most, like you said, Malik, from not having enough time. It suffers the most from characterization that I don't think is in line with the movies at all. Does it
And
make
tonal irresponsibility.
tonal
like,
irresponsibility?
Why
and
is
like tone aside, the jokes aren't funny.
I don't find
No.
jokes in this show to be funny, to be quite honest with you. Like, I can't say that, like, oh, the Thor episode is like a bad episode. No, objectively, it's fine. And objectively, even this version of Thor is fine. It's just obnoxious.
Of all of the joke heavy ones, the Thor one is the one where the jokes work the most, and that's not like something that you want to hear because it didn't work particularly well even there. But by comparison to the other joke heavy episodes, I was like, fine, at least this doesn't have the zombies problem. At least if the whole episode is going to be a Looney Tune, then the jokes aren't getting in the way of anything. That's just what you're
Hey
here.
Nick,
Hey.
Well, Brianna, Nick will get this joke, but you won't. So there's a scene in The Boys where Homelander like bludgeons essentially an Asian daredevil. He like smashes his
Yeah, we watched that scene.
eardrums.
Brianna, yeah,
Oh
Brianna
yeah,
has seen that scene.
she's seen that scene. Okay, yeah. I wanted to do that when Bucky was fighting zombified Captain
Oh
America.
no.
Cuts him in half with the shield.
This is
And
the
he's
end
like,
of the line.
"This is the end of the line, pal," and then walks away. I'm like, "Oh my god!" I really
hate
wish
it.
my ears
I
did not just
hate
hear that.
it. The line in the zombie episode where Bucky like slices Cap in half is like, I guess this is the end of the line, pal. I'm like,
No, I didn't hate that.
Hope. I hated it. I'm like, Hope.
That's really bad.
Like, I don't know why.
Hope flies into Sharon and bursts out of her and is like, yeah, guys, I'm covered in Sharon.
Yeah, that was.
Oh yeah, that's awful. That's really
It's-
bad.
It's so bizarre, but like even beyond the jokes, the characterization in the zombies one baffles me. Does it make sense because the zombie episode takes place at like the time of
Characterization is the only part of that. That I found that episode to be fun.
does it make sense to either of you that circa Infinity War, Vision would be in a place where he would kidnap people, chop them up into pieces, feed them to a zombified Wanda, and not understand that what he's doing is wrong?
Absolutely not. It's not. None of that is a problem. It's specifically the not understanding that gets me. None of it is a problem. I could totally buy that Vision became that kind of villain, like on purpose, with intent. But no, him
I-
not knowing that that's maybe not the move, incorrect.
I can't even give it that. Like, yeah, Vision
Yeah,
loves.
I don't know if I don't know if I buy that. I don't know if in that time we get Vision to a place where he's ready to murder a bunch of innocents for Wanda.
Yeah,
Um,
like Vision loves Wanda, and we established that as early as Civil War. But this is this weird thing where, like,
I think we're doing the same thing that we do in the last episode, where it's like, well, this machine was made to like destroy the Infinity Stones on my universe, not yours. Like, we know that they love each other, but how much? How many different interactions have they had that we don't know about?
right? But like, I just think
And that is an ask. It's a reach, but that's what I have to assume, given that he's killing people and chopping them up into bits for her.
yeah. Again, you have to.
and I could not
for
stand
that,
Scott
and then-
Lang constantly making a stupid
Ah,
zombies joke every
thank
10
you.
seconds about that.
Thank you for reminding me because I'd forgotten about Scott, and he's the worst part of that episode.
I couldn't forget about that jarhead. He wouldn't shut up.
Oh.
my god! I felt like I was watching an episode of Futurama.
And just like Scott's a
Not
funny.
in a bad way. That suited me. That kind of cockamamie nonsense felt very Futurama, and it suited me. It was nostalgic.
It baffles me because like it's like the Vision thing. I know Vision loves Wanda, but from
Not that much.
what we'd seen of him in Infinity War and Civil War, he's a guy with empathy. He's a guy who understands what the right thing is and doesn't want to hurt people.
The worst part is that he has a lot, but like he has a way to hold them off. It's like if you have a conceivable way to not do this, or at least not in this way, why would you? And you have a beacon to summon people to. You could have very easily just made a compound, a complex, something. You
Well-
could have done a thing.
His thing is like he needs to feed Wanda to like keep her at bay or keep her alive while
Honey,
he
I
works
will
on
tell you
finding
right
a
now,
cure.
there are people on this planet, especially that one, who want to die.
But I mean, like, will the zombies die if they don't eat people? Can you not just like hold one without feeding them for a while?
I have no idea. They might just become even more unstable. They might just continue to decay without anything alive holding them together.
Yeah, we're not given enough information
Oh,
on
yes.
that. Typically, in most zombie stuff, they can go without eating for damn near decades and be fine. Well, not fine. Their body still deteriorates, but they'll still be like alive and be able to walk around.
But like just like
Okay.
just like with Vision, like Scott's a funny guy, but he's not a literal clown who can only respond to things with jokes. Scott is
Yeah.
a character who will recognize when a situation is like dire sometimes.
And act relatively accordingly.
And again, he has empathy. One of his best friends gets taken by Wanda and killed. And he's like, watch out, she's a man-eater. Oh, whoops, I did it again, making jokes. Just, oh my gosh, I hate it. I really hate that episode so much. I thought I'd gotten over it, but the more I'm talking about it, I'm just getting mad at it again.
I don't blame you, Nick. But that mystery episode of who's taking out members of the initiative, like that was really solid. I enjoyed
I
that.
love that
quite a
episode,
bit.
except for the jokes. Because that episode
Let's
also
just take the jokes out of the equation. Clearly, 99% of them are not landing.
we've got Thor's corpse like minutes after he and Hawkeye have just died. Phil Coulson goes up to the corpse, sniffs it, and is like, even while rotting, he still smells like
That
lavender.
was uncalled for. That is not my Phil Coulson. Not the Phil Coulson I know.
It is
Yeah.
insane.
Once again,
It was literally like the most, like me and Brianna talked about this. That's worse than the Michael Myers in the 2019 movie of just like murdering a girl and then aggressively slamming the bedroom door, giving you like major necrophiliac vibes.
But yeah, just the characterization all around is kind of iffy, but particularly when it came time to like inject humor, it felt like these guys just did not have a handle on the characters they were writing, and that sullies even the solid episodes, because otherwise I really do love that murder mystery one. I like building on a Fury's big week as a basis. I like putting I mentioned this off camera, but like I like putting Fury in the capital P protagonist role for once, like letting Sam Jackson lead one of the stories. And like it's a nice mystery with like a satisfying end point. And Michael Douglas, for the one scene that he's there, he's given a really good vocal performance. Like there's so many nuggets of greatness in this show, and we haven't even talked about the visuals. The visuals are consistently impressive. There's a lot to like in this show, but it's so held back by all of these consistent writing problems.
Yeah, I just hope that they further improve for season 2. But I didn't outright hate this. And I think like there's definitely some really bad episodes and some solid episodes and some, just fine episodes.
Yeah, I
But
definitely would not bring myself to say I hated it, but it's on the low tier of the MCU projects for me. Like this
yeah,
is
I
with
wouldn't.
Ant-Man
I
and the
definitely would
Wasp,
not.
Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, I wouldn't go out of my way to ever watch this again.
But I
But,
mean, hey, like we started saying, they're in an era of taking some big swings and seeing what sticks, and I guess I gotta admire that.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's what I wanted to see.
Mm-hmm.
But anywho, guys, that's gonna do it for us. Let us know what you think of What If, and also the Eternals, and we will catch you guys on the next one.